March 2026, 3:12 a.m. A massive explosion occurred in eastern Crimea, again severely damaging the Kerch bridge structure. Initial analysis estimated the explosion's magnitude to be more than 2.3 tons of TNT equivalent, rendering 3 bridge piers inoperable and completely collapsing an 82-meter section of track. A Russian statement also confirmed that 18 transport vehicles fell into the sea. This damage marks the second major structural collapse of the Kerch Bridge since the 2022 war, an event that will have a direct impact on Crimea's strategic map. The explosion was likely not a single-point accident, but rather a high-precision attack with military objectives. While the Ukrainian military has refrained from making official statements, multiple Western intelligence sources have characterized the attack as a precision strike using multiple means, carried out after partially neutralizing Russia's air defenses. The angle of the shock wave observed near the hypocenter suggests the impact of a guided missile from above or a multi-stage guided drone. Immediately after the incident, Russia explained it as a terrorist attack using a large drone, but this explanation is inconsistent given the shape of the hypocenter, the extent of the damage to the bridge, and the scale of the chain reaction fires that followed the explosion. The explosion marks on the top of the bridge indicate compression damage from above, rather than a shock wave from below, and the view that it was an attack using a complex guided weapon is becoming mainstream among military experts. In any case, this attack has clearly inflicted strategic damage on the Crimean supply network, on which Russia has long relied. Crimea is considered a supply hub for the entire Russian military, and the Kerch Bridge was its artery. According to Russian Defense Ministry statistics, an average of 3,200 tons of military supplies pass over the bridge each day. This amount consisted of approximately 1,100 tons of ammunition, 600 tons of fuel, and 1,500 tons of other supplies, and this transport volume had been considered the minimum required to maintain the southern front. However, the recent collapse has reduced road access by more than 90%, limiting alternative routes to a maximum transport capacity of 1,300 tons per day. A simple calculation shows that the Russian military has immediately lost approximately 1,900 tons of supply capacity, a significant loss that directly affects the continuation of fighting in the south. Immediately after the explosion, flames were confirmed at a fuel storage facility in northern Crimea, with an estimated loss of more than 20,000 liters of fuel. This secondary damage has significantly reduced the operational capacity of Russian vehicle units and slowed the deployment of supply units. These circumstances confirm that the Ukrainian attack was not intended to be a one-off destruction, but rather to systematically paralyze the supply function itself. President Zelensky has consistently stated that cutting off Crimean supply lines is a strategic goal. He has stated that isolating Crimea is the quickest route to depriving the country of its ability to continue war, and the recent damage indicates that this policy decision has now moved into the implementation stage. The Ukrainian General Staff has strengthened long-term surveillance and electromagnetic reconnaissance of Crimea since late 2025, and has been compiling data on bridge vulnerabilities, security cycles, air defense network relocation, and the effective range of electronic jamming. The integration of intelligence gathering and offensive capabilities was coordinated with support from the United States and the EU, and this attack is considered to be one example of the success of that effort. The vulnerability of the Russian military has also been clearly exposed. Analysis has indicated that the S-400 long-range air defense system deployed near Kerch was not operational at the time of the explosion. The cause of the explosion is unknown, but possible causes include electronic jamming, a lack of ammunition, a lack of operating personnel, or simple poor maintenance. Since the fall of 2025, the Russian military has demonstrated a decline in its air defense capabilities on multiple fronts, raising concerns that the actual state of Crimea's defenses may be significantly weaker than external assessments. The second collapse of the Kerch Bridge will have significant impacts not only militarily but also politically. Political uncertainty has already been growing within Russia over who is responsible for the country's defense failures, and this latest collapse will exacerbate doubts about the Putin administration's ability to control the region. In particular, the fact that Crimea's defense system, which the Russian military has long positioned as absolute defense, was breached in a mere few minutes of attack has caused serious shock both within and outside the administration. There is no denying that structural problems have emerged, including incompetence in the defense industry, corruption within the military, and a breakdown in command and control on the ground. Meanwhile, for Ukraine, this attack will be a strategic asset that will broaden the opening for a breakthrough on the southern front. A supply cutoff not only weakens the Russian military's offensive capabilities, but also makes it difficult to maintain the defense line itself. Supply chains are crucial in ground warfare, and a 40% or greater reduction in transportation volume rapidly weakens the ability to control defensive operations. Crimea, in particular, has limited external supply routes, making infrastructure extremely difficult to restore once destroyed. This latest destruction demonstrates that the Ukrainian military is accurately applying the military principle of cutting off supply lines and steadily building an advantage. This could have three simultaneous effects: tactically destroying the bridge, operationally isolating Crimea, and strategically increasing pressure on the southern front. This is noteworthy as an indicator that the Ukrainian military is regaining military initiative over Russia. However, this incident is having a broader impact than simply destroying a bridge. Multiple simultaneous infrastructure attacks across Crimea are likely to inflict systematic damage on the entire Russian military supply network. This article details the location, scale of damage, and military effects of the 6 bridge collapses observed immediately after the KERCH Bridge collapse, and analyzes how the Ukrainian military disrupted the entire supply network. Within hours of the second collapse of the KERCH Bridge, 6 major bridges on the Crimean Peninsula ceased functioning almost simultaneously. The 6 bridges affected were the Topol Bridge, Chang'e Bridge, Kenichesk Bridge, Armyansk Bridge, Perekopysmus Bridge, and Karachunsky Supply Bridge, stretching from the north to the south of the peninsula. All of these bridges are essential structures on the Russian military's supply route connecting Crimea and Kherson, and were listed as highly important locations for military transportation. Geographical analysis indicates that these 6 bridges were key targets in the supply line disruption operation being carried out by the Ukrainian military in the south, and the attacks were carried out in tandem with the destruction of the KERCH Bridge. The attacks were concentrated between 3:20 and 4 a.m., and shock waves were confirmed to be coming from the same direction at multiple locations. The most effective attack method is considered to be a 3-tiered strike formation combining HIMARS, high-mobility artillery rocket system, ATACMS, long-range tactical missiles, and a suicide FPV drone. HIMARS is responsible for precision strikes with a maximum range of 80 kilometers, targeting structural weaknesses in bridges. ATACMS utilizes its long range to destroy high-value targets such as support pier connections. The FPV drones are believed to have carried out additional attacks on damaged areas after impact, maximizing the destruction rate. According to Russian surveillance radar records, a total of 28 projectiles were spotted during the attack. Of these, at least 19 were confirmed to have landed, and 9 are likely intercepted by air defense networks. However, the interception success rate was only around 30%, meaning the destructive effect on bridges could not be fully contained. The damaged sections of each bridge are as follows. Topol Bridge, 38 meters of bridge girder collapsed, halting all transport capacity. Chang'e Bridge, 55 meters of structural section ruptured, and the railway section was engulfed in flames. Kenichesk Bridge, the southern road was completely destroyed, and 12 military vehicles overturned. Armyansk Bridge, 2 piers were damaged by a direct hit from an ATACMS. Perekopysmus Bridge, the explosion destroyed the connecting road, causing a supply convoy to be delayed. Karachunsky Supply Bridge, 6 fuel trucks exploded, spreading fire to surrounding facilities. Satellite images revealed charred areas measuring 20 to 40 meters in diameter around each bridge, and damage also spread to nearby fuel facility supply bases. In the Kenichesk area in particular, an estimated 14,000 liters of fuel was lost in the explosion at a fuel storage facility, causing supply functions to be almost completely halted. The simultaneous silence of these 6 bridges instantly paralyzed the Russian military's supply network. The total amount of supplies supplied to Crimea from the north is said to be 1,500 to 1,700 tons per day on average. However, after the bridge destruction, this capacity fell to 35 to 40%, far below the standard required to continue operations. The impact on ammunition supplies has been particularly severe, completely cutting off the transport routes for 122mm and 152mm shells on which artillery units on the southern front rely. Confusion is spreading within the Russian military. A communications failure occurred at the logistics headquarters in the northern part of the peninsula, leaving some units isolated from their chain of command. According to the Ukrainian General Staff, within 24 hours of the attack, numerous Russian soldiers were seen retreating across Crimea, with many abandoning positions due to a lack of supplies. Independent monitoring groups on the ground have reported that at least 230 to 260 Russian soldiers may have been injured, and 30 to 40 killed. Furthermore, the vehicle losses confirmed in this attack are significant. Approximately 27 military trucks were destroyed and 10 fuel tank vehicles were rendered unusable. Furthermore, a Russian tank unit stationed near the bridge was attacked, with a total of 8 vehicles, including T-72B3 and T-80BVs, set on fire. 13 armored vehicles were damaged, significantly reducing the unit's operational capability. As a result, Russian ground forces in the south have lost their readiness, hindering their ability to maintain their front line. The Ukrainian attack has not only destroyed the bridge, but has also inflicted knock-on damage on nearby ammunition depots. In the Chandler district, an explosion occurred at an ammunition depot approximately 10 minutes after the attack, resulting in the loss of an estimated 220 tons of ammunition. The scale of the explosion affected areas within several hundred meters, directly reducing Russia's firepower projection capabilities. The Russian military's logistics network was already vulnerable on multiple fronts, but the simultaneous collapse of 6 bridges has clearly exposed its structural flaws. This clearly demonstrates strategic failures, such as the concentration of many supply routes on a few highly dependent bridges, the lack of development of backup routes, and the inability of the air defense network to withstand a saturation attack. In contrast, the Ukrainian operational plan has consistently aimed to disrupt the southern supply network, and this attack was positioned as the central step in that plan. The rapid deployment of complex, guided attack methods and the simultaneous destruction of multiple bridges has been extremely effective in all tactical, operational, and strategic aspects. In particular, delays in Russian supply chains have had a cascading effect across the entire front, making it easier for the Ukrainian military to secure an advantage in future counteroffensives. The facts presented in this chapter are clear. The supply network in northern and eastern Crimea was rendered structurally dysfunctional in an operation that lasted just a few dozen minutes. The Russian military's logistical capabilities are no longer experiencing a temporary decline, but are entering a stage that directly translates into strategic disadvantage. This paper provides a detailed analysis of the 6-hour, hellish airstrike that completely silenced the Black Sea Fleet, detailing the ships destroyed, the scale of losses, and the structure of the air operations. Within 12 hours of the simultaneous collapse of the Kerch Bridge and the northern supply chain, large-scale airstrikes against Russian forces were observed off the Crimean coast. The focus was on key Black Sea Fleet bases, including the Sevastopol naval base. The 6-hour series of attacks, carried out intermittently, effectively rendered the fleet inoperable. The attacks were carried out in 4 phases, with a total of 78 targets identified, demonstrating the systematic integration of Ukrainian long-range strike capabilities and precision-guided technology. In the first phase, a simultaneous launch of electronic jamming and guided missiles was used to saturate Russia's air defenses, neutralizing multiple radar bands of the S-300 and S-400. Shortly afterward, 12 air defense posts were destroyed by cruise missiles, rendering the entire coastline non-functional. This dramatically increased the success rate of subsequent attacks on ships and significantly reduced the Russian ability to intercept them. The second phase involved precision strikes on the ships, using JDAM-guided bombs and Storm Shadow cruise missiles. And Neptune anti-ship missiles were simultaneously fired. Concentrated attacks were confirmed on high-value targets, particularly command ships, frigates, and landing ships. One Black Sea Fleet flagship was completely sunk, and 3 frigates were completely destroyed due to a munitions magazine explosion. Furthermore, 2 landing ships and 2 small missile boats sustained heavy damage, rendering the fleet's organization itself dysfunctional. The loss of the command ship dealt a direct blow to command and control, cutting off the combat command network for several hours and disrupting decision-making and coordination throughout the fleet. In the third phase, concentrated attacks were carried out on the fleet's logistics infrastructure, particularly destroying fuel facilities, munitions magazines, and communications relay stations. In the Sevastopol area, 21 fuel magazines exploded, resulting in the loss of an estimated 7,800 to 9,400 tons of fuel, effectively rendering the continued operation of ships and air units impossible. Additionally, chain reactions have been confirmed at 6 munitions depots, resulting in significant losses of missile, artillery, and torpedo inventories. These losses are likely to limit the fleet's offensive capabilities for weeks or months. In the fourth phase, pursuit attacks continued on the port exit and coastal defense facilities to contain the remaining retreating ships. Surveillance drone footage shows several ships that attempted to escape to the open sea sustained damage and were left stranded within the harbor. These ships are at anchor with no power or steering, and there are no signs that the Black Sea Fleet will be able to reorganize immediately. The success of this attack can be attributed to the precision of the multi-stage, multi-waveform attack employed by the Ukrainian military. Traditionally, Russia has been considered superior in naval power due to the number and displacement of its ships, but Ukraine has densely integrated technologies such as precision-guided weapons, satellite positioning, unmanned aerial reconnaissance, and electronic jamming, effectively turning its ships into fixed targets. In particular, the coordination of real-time ship position information and guided missiles has proven lethal against outdated Russian air defense networks. The damage to the Black Sea Fleet confirmed during the 6-hour airstrikes was severe, including the sinking of 1 flagship, the total loss of 3 escort ships, the destruction of 2 landing ships, the burning of 2 small missile boats, the explosion of 21 fuel depots, the destruction of 6 munitions depots, and the neutralization of 4 communications facilities. This scale of damage is considered the largest loss of combat capability for the Russian Navy since 2014. The loss of the fleet will affect maritime replenishment, coastal defense, air support, and operational coordination, and will leave ground forces on the southern front strategically isolated. From this analysis, it is clear that the destruction of the Black Sea Fleet is not simply a naval loss, it fundamentally undermines the entire Crimean defense structure. The halting of the fleet will dramatically increase the Ukrainian military's operational freedom, with long-term implications for the military balance across Crimea. This article details from the perspectives of military theory and regional strategy how the 3-stage sequential effects of the collapse of the KERCH Bridge, the simultaneous destruction of 6 bridges, and the annihilation of the Black Sea Fleet will lead to the strategic disruption of the Crimean defense network. The second collapse of the KERCH Bridge represents not just damage to infrastructure, but the collapse of the Russian military's very strategic foundation. The Crimean Peninsula is highly isolated geographically, and the KERCH Bridge has relied on as the main direct route to mainland Russia. With this latest collapse, Crimea has effectively been cut off from mainland Russia, resulting in a decisive loss of military and logistical connectivity. The interruption of supply routes will immediately impact Crimea's ability to continue fighting, creating a critical gap in the defense posture of the entire peninsula. The damage is even greater from the perspective of the supply network. The Russian military has built supply lines totaling approximately 1,200 kilometers to maintain its presence in Crimea and on the southern front, and the starting point for these lines has always been the Kerch Bridge. The collapse of the bridge has severely limited the starting point of this 1,200-kilometer supply line, significantly reducing its ability to deliver supplies to troops deployed in the Kherson, Melitopol, and Zaporizhia regions. While alternative routes exist, their transport capacity is limited, at most able to transport around 1,300 tons per day, far below the minimum level required to maintain the front line. As a result, the logistical strain places a triple burden on frontline forces: delays, shortages, and fragmentation, thereby reducing their combat effectiveness. In strategic theory, it is no exaggeration to say that the loss of a single bridge can end a campaign. Russia's military deployment is built around the Crimean supply network, and the loss of the bridge means that Moscow has lost its base for command, coordination, and deployment. First, restrictions on troop movements will significantly limit the time and quantity of reinforcements to the southern front, reducing strategic flexibility. Second, disruptions to supply transportation will make it difficult to continue offensive operations, forcing the Russian military to go on the defensive. Furthermore, a decline in communications and coordination will disrupt the strategic alignment between the front lines and central command, weakening overall campaign control. The political impact in Russia will also be serious. The Putin administration has used Crimea as a symbol of unity domestically, but the repeated destruction of this symbol through attacks will deal a direct blow to the regime's foundations. The bridge collapse is not simply a military failure, it will create the impression both domestically and internationally that Russia's foreign, territorial, and military policies have collapsed, undermining the regime's credibility. In particular, this collapse indicates serious flaws in the defense network, exposing structural problems such as military corruption, inadequate command and supervision, and delays in equipment upgrades. Meanwhile, Ukraine is making the most of this strategic disruption. The collapse of the Kerch Bridge significantly reduced the Russian military's ability to supply the southern front, granting the Ukrainian military greater freedom for offensive operations. In particular, the isolation of Crimea has disrupted coordination between the Russian military's front and rear, hindering the normal functioning of troop redeployment, supply, and maintenance. Seizing this as a strategic opportunity, the Ukrainian military has combined three elements: joint attacks, mobile warfare, and supply chain disruption, to sustainably pressure Russian military forces. From an international perspective, this strategic disruption is also having major repercussions. Since the attack on Crimea, NATO countries have accelerated their support for Ukraine, rapidly expanding the supply of weapons that could determine the outcome of the war, such as long-range missiles, anti-aircraft systems, and electronic warfare equipment. In particular, Western military officials are beginning to share the view that the collapse of the Kerch Bridge demonstrates Ukraine's advanced precision strike capabilities, and that the Russian military's defenses are now at a stage where they can be penetrated. This change is also expected to have diplomatic ramifications, leading to additional sanctions and increased political pressure on Russia. The strategic disruption in Crimea is affecting the situation on the southern front, domestic Russian political dynamics, and the international community's policy toward Russia. The military vacuum created by the bridge collapse is not a temporary accident, but a structural change that will shake up the entire campaign. This incident has enabled Ukrainian forces to consolidate their initiative, forcing Russian forces into a defensive position. This paper examines in detail the Russian military capabilities gap and Ukrainian military advantages exposed by this strategic disruption from the perspectives of military comparison and logistical analysis. The successive blows of the Kerch Bridge collapse, the simultaneous destruction of 6 bridges, and the annihilation of the Black Sea Fleet suddenly exposed the structural flaws of the Russian military. It has become clear that the collapse is not a matter of military strength or the number of equipment, but rather the very foundation of the military operational, logistical, and command and control capabilities. The Russian military's weaknesses are not regional issues, but are common to all fronts. Crimea is simply the location where they are most evident. First, there is the issue of supply shortages. The southern front, centered on Crimea, has long been touted by the Russian military as an area where it has secured a strategic advantage. However, in reality, its supply network is extremely vulnerable, remaining a single-tiered structure reliant on a few bridges and sea transport. The loss of the Kerch Bridge has reduced logistics capacity from 3,200 tons per day to less than 1,300 tons, and there are shortages of artillery shells, fuel, food, and spare parts. In particular, the amount of artillery shells fired on the southern front has decreased by an average of 40 to 55% over the past week, rapidly reducing its ability to counterattack. This is due to supply cuts rather than a lack of equipment, and is having a direct impact on the continued operations of frontline forces. Second, there is the collapse of the chain of command. As symbolized by the sinking of the Black Sea Fleet's command ship, the Russian military has lost its unified command structure, resulting in intermittent transmission of operational orders. Frequent communications blackouts have occurred around Crimea, forcing some units to make independent decisions without contact from central command. Effective electronic jamming and data link attacks by the Ukrainian military have made it difficult for Russia to assess the situation and predict attacks. This lack of command and control not only slows down unit operations but also undermines the strategic integrity of the entire military. Furthermore, widespread corruption is accelerating the decline in military strength. According to Russian internal audit documents, as of 2025, approximately 15 to 20% of the military's budget had been misappropriated, and actual fuel and ammunition stockpiles and supply units were consistently lower than reported. In fact, cases have been confirmed in Crimean supply depots where only about half the ammunition was present before the attacks. This logistical collapse is not a result of the attack itself, but rather the result of long-term organizational corruption. When necessary battlefield resources are unclear or in short supply, tactical decisions and operational plans are impossible. The difference becomes even clearer when compared with the Ukrainian military. Ukraine has established a new form of warfare by combining AI analysis, satellite data, FPV drones, and electronic warfare systems. The combination of drones and precision-guided weapons, in particular, gives it an overwhelming advantage over the Russian military's outdated operational systems. This technology-integrated tactic was the reason the Ukrainian military was able to neutralize the Black Sea Fleet so quickly. The Russian side lacks the ability to develop similar tactics. The difference in mentality cannot be ignored either. Ukraine is fighting a defensive battle for the survival of its nation, and morale is extremely high. President Zelensky's leadership goes beyond symbolism and creates strategic unity. In contrast, the Russian military is centered around mobilized troops, resulting in low morale and a reduced tolerance for losses. The multiple confirmed troop withdrawals and unauthorized withdrawals from Crimea indicate that maintaining the front line has reached its mental and physical limits. As a result of these combined factors, the Russian military is no longer able to meet the requirements for continuing the war in terms of supplies, command, morale, or technology. Conversely, Ukraine has achieved a combination of successes: supply network disruption, fleet neutralization, and electronic warfare superiority, and is firmly seizing the tactical and operational initiative. These changes are not limited to Crimea but are spreading across the entire southern front, creating a broader strategic advantage. This article analyzes how this structure of advantage will affect international relations, particularly Western countries' accelerated support and increased pressure on Russia, from diplomatic, economic, and security perspectives. The success of the consecutive attacks on Crimea lies in the maturation of the territorial superiority strategy that the Ukrainian military has been building over the past few years. Rather than engaging in a conventional war that competes head-on with the Russian military in terms of military strength, Ukraine has adopted a systematic approach that prioritizes control of the seas, airspace, and cyberspace. This has effectively neutralized the quantitative advantages of the Russian military, such as troop concentration, artillery density, and number of naval vessels, and has created a structure that allows it to constantly maintain the strategic initiative. This strategy formed the basis for the three-stage effect of the attack on Crimea. First, it deprived Ukraine of maritime superiority.